project for today is going to be continuing on this MTD race mower I did the previous video on. If you didn't watch the previous video, I'll put a link to that in the description so you can watch that one first. At the end of that video, this thing had died out back, and I was thinking I had a coil problem because it would fire back up and then it would die again. But as you can see here, the tank kind of cracked apart on me, and I did mention there was hairline cracks in the gas tank, and what happened was the rubber piece out of this cap fell down in there, and you can see all the plastic like deteriorated so bad that it's like all the little flakes of nasty looking plastic down in there, and then little pieces of that rubber that was in the cap fell down in there, and it's completely plugged the outlet for the fuel. So I had a couple of parts mowers sitting around that were these MTDs, so I have another tank here that we could put on. That one's clean on the inside, and then the plastic looks a lot better. There's no cracking or anything in it. So we're gonna put that on there, and then I've got this seat. It's not the greatest, but it's still better than what's on there with all the cracks, and the foam is kind of rotten on this thing. And then I did find the proper belt for it. You could see the difference here. It says MTD runs a different profile, so with that variable pulley. So this has a lot steeper angle here. This is it's more flat and then wider. This is just a plain 5/8 V-belt, and then this is an actual MTD belt. So I found that we'll put on there. I'm still running a smaller 1/2-inch normal belt on the back, which is not correct, but it did work for a lot of years, so I think we'll just leave that alone. But I did take the belts off camera just because I wanted to get a measurement on everything to see what I needed to replace everything with. But I think the first thing we'll do is I'll take these bolts out here, and we'll kind of prop this hood deal back, and I'll pull this tank out of here, and then we could put that other tank on there, and we're probably gonna have to, I'm gonna pull the float bowl and this fuel filter and blow them out in case it sucked in a bunch of that junk, which I'm thinking it probably did. So we'll blow air backwards through the fuel line and everything to get all that pushed out of there too. But I'll get you set up and we'll get started. So these are just a couple of 7/16 bolts that I had in here. Another thing I forgot to mention is I got a new solenoid here, and I'm going to put a battery in it, and we'll clean up the connections on that starting system. Being that I'm not actually racing it anymore and we're just playing around with it, it's kind of a pain to bring the jumper pack wherever I'm going with it. And if I kill it or anything, I can't restart it. I end up having to walk back, so it'll be nicer to just be able to start it. So hopefully that's enough room. We can sneak that tank out of there. All it is a zip tie that holds those tanks. But I do have to get the fuel line off of the bottom of the tank, which I think, I'm not sure if there's enough room. I'd like to leave this shutoff valve on there so we don't have to drain the fuel while it's still in here. Yeah, that's some nasty looking fuel that's dripping out of there. I'm pretty sure that got into the carburetor. So if there's any left in here, you can kind of see how orange that is. I don't know if there was stuff stuck on the sides of the tank, because I did rinse it out on the last video. I didn't really get much out of there, so I just left it, but I probably should have took it off and did what we're doing right now. This just has a big zip tie goes around the middle to hold it in. Even from the factory, that's how they are. Forgot we had a hole in the top of the tank. That hole is just not quite big enough to get that fuel shut off through, so we're gonna have to pull the line off the tank without spilling a ton of fuel, I hope. Yeah, that worked. So now I can pull this fuel line out of here and see what we have to clean out here. I think I'll drop the float bowl on it just to make sure. There was a lot of junk came out of that tank when I pulled or drained the fuel out of the tank. I've got one of these big zip ties, but it's a clear or white one. I don't really like using these just because if you have them sit out in the sun or anything, they kind of, I think they call it photo degrading when the sun kind of eats plastic. The black ones don't really do that, but hopefully this doesn't sit outside anymore. I'm going to try to keep it inside. So. But we'll replace it with a black one if we need to. I just didn't have any at the moment. I could have used a bunch of the smaller black ones, but kind of. Oh, there it went down in there better. It was hitting on the steering shaft. So we'll cut that tail of that off. If I can find my cutter. There we go. Then I'll pull this fuel line off here. We'll blow all that out with air. I'll pull this float bowl off and see if we sucked anything in there. I'm thinking our biggest issue was just the plug outlet on the tank. Let me grab that pan to put under here. There wasn't a heck of a lot of fuel in the float bowl, it seems like. That still looks clean. Yeah, you can see it's more of that orange looking stuff. I don't know if that was just from the plastic degrading or what. But everything else looks clean. There was no actual debris. It was more just colored looking fuel. So I think that'll be fine. But I'll go blow those fuel lines out, and then we'll put the hood back down and everything with the new fuel lines, or the fuel lines on there, and then we'll fire it up and make sure it runs okay, and then we'll continue on with the rest of the stuff. So I got the fuel lines put back in there and everything, and I got the hood put back down, the new tank in here, and then I was gonna try to fire it up, but I forgot I had the pulleys off of it and stuff, so I think I'm gonna address trying to put that belt on first. So we gotta go under here, and I already put some grease on that shaft. So this pulley was a little bit rusted on there. I must have not did that last time, or just sat long enough that it was rusted through. But then we'll put the belt on this pulley first. So what I had to do was, there is a little keeper here. You just take it loose so it's wobbly enough that you can get the top belt off. And then there was a snap ring on top of here and a little like nylon washer. So that way you can pull, this whole assembly comes up. You don't have to pull it off all the way, but you just need to get it up high enough that you're able to slide that belt up underneath and then run it to the front. So hopefully I got you in a spot there that you could see. I'll try to slip this belt down. You guys can probably see better than I can. One thing about these MTDs is they're not, with the variable pulleys, they're not the easiest to change belts on. That rear belt isn't too bad, but when you gotta do the front and the rear, it's not too easy. I think I got it, but it's gotta be slid up above all these linkages and stuff. There we go. Slide that forward. I also took this spring off that holds tension on that section of pulleys there, the variable pulley side. And now we'll go to the front. See if we can work this up. Well, that went actually way easier than I thought it would. So now we got that part done. Now we can put that belt to the actual transaxle in the back. So this one's a little bit tougher for me to get the camera in so you guys can see what I'm doing here, but hopefully you can see a little bit. I'm putting it on the variable pulley side first, and then we'll try to work it around this. There, we got that on there, and my other tensioner pulley. So that should be good. We've just got to put that snap ring back on top. That was this piece and this piece. So I'll put that down, and then I'll get a snap ring pliers and we'll put that back on there. And the belt portion of this should be done, and then we're gonna get to replacing this solenoid. So once we do that, I'll show you how I diagnosed that this solenoid was bad when we get to that part. I forgot about this big spring here. This one can be kind of tough because I need to pull it from the back and I can't really see what I'm doing. And it's a super heavy spring. I know the last time I did it, I had somebody help me guide it while I pulled, which is not the safest thing either. Whew, that is one tough spring, and it's a terrible angle here. I'm trying to get it up and around this axle. It's hard to get it in the correct spot. There, we finally got it. That was a tough one. That is a really heavy spring. If you take the front belt off, it's a lot easier to get, I think, but it's hard to get the belt back on, so what I did is I put a clamp on here to hold this clutch pedal back all the way. So now, hopefully that'll go back up. But I've got it in the highest gear setting, and then so it does push it all the way forward, but hopefully we don't have it stuck now. It's kind of not wanting to move now for some reason, but I'll monkey with it a little bit and get that figured out. It moves them movable pulleys back and forth. So now I've got to try to work this belt back up into the pulley here. Just knocked you guys over. So in order to get that belt looser, I put it all the way down into the lowest gear. So when you're in the lower gear here, or in the parking brake side, it moves this pulley all the way forward, and then as you put it in gear, it goes farther back, and then this takes up the slack there with another pulley. This is run backwards actually. It should push in on the belt, and it runs the other direction. When it's stock, it doesn't work this way, it works the opposite, but it's a lot bigger pulley in the back. It's like a 10-inch pulley back here when it's stocked, 8 or 10, I don't remember, but we have a 4-inch back here now. So it's just kind of the way it ended up getting rigged up. So now we actually have the belt portion done. I put this spring over here back on. So now we can get into the starting issue. I think I'm gonna pull this seat off first, just because it'll give us a little more room, and I'm gonna be swapping it over anyway. So we'll take those 4 bolts out that hold the seat on here, and then we'll get swapping that solenoid and cleaning up all those electrical connections. These are just 9/16 heads on the seat bolts. Get that out of there. And we can have a little bit more room here when this is straight up. I can put the battery tray back in. You can see that's got pretty rusted, but it still works. And then I'll show you here how I diagnosed that this was a bad solenoid. So the solenoid does click when you hit the key, so you know that we're getting 12 volts to our trigger wire that's down below here. I'll show you on the new one. It'd be easier just for the visual anyway. So this is just a simple 1 trigger wire solenoid. So you'll have the battery power coming in on this side, and then this wire will go to your starter. So when you hear the solenoid click, you can know that there's 12 volts coming to this trigger wire, and then you can test this side, and this side on this one had no voltage coming out of this side, so the contacts inside were not making connection. So that's how I diagnosed it was a bad solenoid. If you don't have power to here, it can be a safety switch, or your key switch is bad, or something like that. And then if you have power here and it's clicking and power coming out here, then there's something in between here and your starter, or your starter's bad, which at that point I usually will put 12 volts right to the stud on the starter. So that'd be this stud here. You can run 12 volts here like I was doing with the jumper pack, and then just run your ground to like a mounting bolt on the engine or something. And if it whips over that way, then you know that the starter's still good anyway, and then it'd be something in this wire in the connections or something. But we'll get to swapping this over, and it looks like my connections here are pretty rusty, so we'll take the wire wheel to those and clean those up while we're at it. This one's just got a couple of 7/16 nuts. And that cable end is busted off. We'll have to splice a new end on there. I think that actually happened at one of the races, and I just took the nut off of there and sandwiched that in there. And I think that's a 5/16 nut down below on this one. The new one has a 1/2 inch nuts on the studs. I don't know what was going on with that. I'll have to put a new end on that also. And looks like we got 3/8 bolts holding the solenoid on. And there was the ground wire was back behind that, which that does not make a very good ground when there's paint right there. So I'll take the wire wheel for that too. Get that out of there. So I'm just gonna snip this off. Maybe. It's pretty thick wire for that cutter. And then I'm not sure if I even really need, well yeah, that supplies power to the key switch, so I still need that. I was gonna say I don't have any accessories or anything on this thing, so. That's stripped. This isn't really the right wire strippers for this heavy a wire, but we'll make it work. So the furnace was running for a while, so I did a few things off camera, but I just crimped the ends on the wires and cleaned up our connections and stuff. So now I'm putting this solenoid in. It's got this part kind of sticking up. This one fits a little bit different than the other one, but we're not putting the top cover back on here anyway, so. If it bothers me, I'll change it, but it should be fine. It's not like we're putting together an actual mower we're going to be using for mowing every day. This isn't really the correct spot, I don't think, for this solenoid anyway. I tried it the other direction with this facing, and then I didn't really like how that was either. I could probably just cut that off too. And I've got a new positive connection here. I lost one of our washer pieces there. I did wire wheel our cables. And the spade connection here, I still have to shrink that tubing on there. Just use my little butane torch for that. We'll let that cool off. That's our trigger wire for down underneath here on the solenoid. I'm gonna grab a 1/2-inch socket for the studs there. Plug our trigger wire in. It's a little bit short now. We'll have to re-zip tie some of this stuff up. This actually had a little holder here for this fuse. Might be able to get it back in there unless it's broke. Oh, that slid up in there. Not sure. I had an extra wire hanging there for something. So now we can try putting a battery in it and see if it will turn over. It's pretty much has all the safeties bypassed on it already, so we don't have to worry about any of that. I've got a battery that might be kind of mediocre to throw in there. We'll see if it'll crank it over or not. Hoping my positive cable will reach here. Oh yeah. Just gotta kind of twist it. This doesn't have the best ends on these cables either, but we'll run them until they don't work anymore. Okay, now we should be able to hit the key and have nothing happen. I'm not sure what we've got going. Unless that battery doesn't have any juice in it. Yeah, we don't have much juice, but there still should be enough that it'll click. Well, I'll monkey around with it a little bit and then bring you back. So I pulled our connection off here off the key switch. I pulled both those off and it was corroded in there, so I cleaned that up and put it back on, and now it did turn over slightly, but that battery is pretty well shot. So I'll have to find a different battery to throw in there, but we're on the right track. None of the wiring was wrong or anything like I thought might have been, but I did put it all back the way it was, so I wasn't sure how it would actually be wrong. But our charging system here is not going to work. It's got, I don't know what we really have going on here, but it was kind of arcing when I put the main fuse here back in, and then I came down to unplug this and it kind of sparks when you put it back together when the key's on. So there's something going on goofy in that charging stator. So we'll just leave that unplugged for now So I'll go look for another battery for it, and we'll put a different battery in. If we can get it turning over, then I'll put that seat back on, and we should be ready to try firing it up again. So I didn't find a battery for it, but I did just hook the jumper pack to it, and I threw that seat on there. I'll have to see if I can find a black seat later, but that one should be a little more comfortable for driving on the rough stuff. But I got the jumper pack hooked up, and we'll see if it'll fire up for us. Seems like we're not sucking fuel. I wonder if our float is stuck in there. So as you can see, I can turn the fuel on and we get absolutely nothing out of there. But what happened is, you can see this float, I can't push it up past that. It should go almost so it's flat to the base of the carburetor up here. But the needle seat in there has swollen, so it won't let the needle push up in there far enough. And a lot of times that happens when I did spray carb clean through this, the inlet here, and then let it come out the bottom. And the carb clean can actually make it swell like that. So I probably shouldn't have done that, especially with the aftermarket seats. They'll swell easier than other ones. So I'm gonna pull this float off of here, and we'll see if we can pull that needle seat out without pulling the whole carburetor off the engine. So I'll pull this pin. It holds the float on here. I think I have a needle seat for it, but I'm not sure if it's the right one. So I've got this little tool here. It's actually for Tecumseh, but we'll see if we can get it so we can grab that. A little more difficult when you can't see what you're doing. Felt like I had it for a second. There we go. I don't see where it went though. So I'm not sure how well you can tell on camera, but that's what the needle seat should look like, and that's what it's swollen up to. And you can't really see the difference in thickness, I don't think, on camera too much, maybe a little bit, but how thick it is, that's what was plugging it up so the float wouldn't be able to open. So we'll push this one up in there. This tool has a part you just slide it on, and there's grooves in one side, and that goes up into the carburetor, the groove side, so that faces up on the tool like that, and then we'll push it up through there. So that slid up till it hit bottom. So now we'll put our needle and float back in, and we'll see if that's correct. I'm hoping that was the right seat. I don't want it to, I don't know if that's really hitting the seat. That might have been too little a one. I wasn't sure if that was the right one. I should have just looked it up, but we'll put a pan under it here and turn the fuel on. It does actually stop the fuel, so maybe it's fine. So yeah, that'll probably work. We'll put it back together, and I've tried aftermarket needle seats for these Briggs & Strattons, but they never seem to work very good. They always end up swelling, or they end up just leaking. So I just pretty much have stuck to the OEM Briggs & Stratton parts for the carburetors. So I'll turn the gas on and we'll make sure it doesn't start leaking. A lot of times it'll start coming up in here if the needle's leaking, or it'll come out around the float bowl gasket, because really you shouldn't have fuel higher than about here. If it gets up and over the top, sometimes it'll show a leak there. But I'll leave that on for a little bit and then we'll try starting it. Well, I've had the gas on for a little bit and it doesn't seem like it's leaking. It might be, the float height might need to be adjusted a little bit, but I think we're good enough. We can try it, see what happens. Well, it seemed like it ran okay, but I think it is over fueling, so I'll probably have to adjust that float height a little bit. But other than that, I think we're okay. So I think we're pretty close to getting ready to test it out again. I want to make sure that that belt setup is correct, but I do want to find a battery for it before we run out back. I've got a couple charging now, see if they'll take a charge or not. Otherwise I might have to find a new battery for it. I just didn't really want to spend the money on it. Otherwise I could probably throw it in my mower or something later. So I'm gonna pull this float bowl off one more time and adjust that float height a little bit. If I let it idle at all, it was starting to load up, and then I hit the throttle. You could see smoke come out of the exhaust where it was over fueling and flooding out. Plus it would be good anyway. I flush these lines out, but I make sure there isn't any more junk in the carburetor. Like, stuff can get stuck in those lines when you've got dirty fuel coming through, even when you clean them out. Which there actually, I don't know if you can see that on camera, but there actually was a little bit of pieces of stuff in there. So right now our float is going until it actually almost hits the top of the carburetor. So I'm just gonna take this tab here that the needle sits on, and I'm gonna bend it up just slightly. And we'll put that back up there and see what kind of a difference that made. See, now it's about level where I feel it stop. So you want it to be pretty much level with the bottom of the carburetor, so it stops about there, and before it was going past that, so we were definitely over fueling. And I don't know if you noticed or not, but when I was running it, even in previous videos, it's something to do with the way the frame rate or something of the GoPro. It makes the engine look like it's wobbling back and forth. when it's not actually. You can see I could pull on that pretty hard and it doesn't move, so I don't know why the camera does that. It almost looks like the motor mount bolts are looser, the whole frame is flexing or something on camera. Well, we'll turn the fuel back on and I'll wait a little bit and then we'll fire it up again and see if that solved our overfueling issue. I might have to readjust the carburetor a little bit too. I gotta throw that battery in there. I charged it and it does seem like it tests okay, so we'll get rid of this jumper pack setup. Well, I think we're ready to try firing it up again. I turned the fuel on and it did actually leak a little bit at first and then it seemed to clear up, so I wonder if we were still getting a couple pieces of junk out of that fuel line or something. But I'll turn the fuel back on again here. And we'll see, this will be the first time I test that battery out, see if it'll start on its own battery power, so. That battery is very good. It does seem like we're still overfueling a little bit, but I think it'll be okay as long as we're not letting it idle for too long. It seemed like it was fine when I was giving it throttle. It wasn't spitting fuel back out the carburetor like it was before. So I think it's time we could get it outside and test it out again. So I went to start it to bring it outside and we tore the teeth off of our starter gear here. I knew that wasn't long for this world, so we'll replace the starter real quick on it. I think I've got a replacement one, so I'll get to doing that and then we'll go out and test it. Well, I got the starter replaced, so we'll go try that again. I just had to find make sure that this had the same amount of teeth on it. This is actually off of a Briggs V twin, so I'm hoping it has a little bit more power. I don't know if they run different starters on those or not, but this has more compression than it normally should have had, so it is hard on these starter teeth. This is like the second or third starter that I've had on here. I've just replaced the gear, I think, on the last one last time, but that deteriorated off again. So now we'll see if we can get it out and go do some test runs. Well, I think we improved it quite a bit. It even popped a wheelie a couple times. I think the conditions were deteriorating. The more I would take off and dig all that snow up and stuff, I was losing traction. It was spinning it quite a bit. I only hit about 24 miles an hour, so it's still not what it used to be, but I'm kind of wondering how tired that engine is. That's got a lot of hours on it for racing, so it might be getting kind of wore out. We might have to, now that I'm not racing in that class, I could throw like a opposed twin or something in there. It would be kind of cool to put in here, but we'll see if I decide to do anything else with it. I was pretty happy with how it performed today anyway, and maybe we'll take it out when there's not any snow, and see what we could do on the actual just gravel. I used to have the tires studded because we used to actually race on a lake, and I just put these new tires on it because we'd had so many years that we didn't have snow that it would almost kind of muddy when we were racing. So, and then we did a summer race also, so that's why I had those tires on it. But that's gonna do it for this one. If you like this sort of thing, like the videos and subscribe to the channel, and we'll catch you on the next one.